Hi everyone, my name is Hanjun. Here I'm going to talk about learning discrete energy-based models via auxiliary variable local exploration. This is a joint work with Richard, Bo, Charles, and Dale. In this talk, we present a new algorithm for learning energy-based models for discrete structured data. Our algorithm works for both unconditional and conditional models. In the notation here, X represents the structured data such as sequences, trees, or graphs, and F denotes the energy function. The reason why we want to learn such model is because of its flexibility. For structured data, one can use a much more flexible form of the energy function rather than the typically used autoregressive models. For example, one can use tree ASTM for a program AST that is represented by a tree, or graph neural networks for molecules that are represented by graphs. However, the partition function is generally intractable to calculate, which makes the learning generally hard. The most successful approach for learning EBMs in general is contrastive learning. Based on this, recently there have been several breakthroughs in learning energy-based models for continuous data. The success can be roughly categorized into two aspects. Firstly, by reformulating the problem using variational approach, one can cast the optimization into a minimax formulation, where one additionally learns a sampler that can generate samples from the currently learned distribution. Secondly, the gradient-based MC-MC can be much more efficient in obtaining samples from the currently learned distribution. However, none of them can be directly transferred into discrete domain. For learning sampler-based approaches, reinforce is required for discrete data, which will have high variance in the gradient estimator. The gradient on discrete data is not properly defined, so approaches like HMC and SGLD cannot be directly used. To handle the first challenge, we reformulated the sampler learning objective into the following form. Here we use the fact that the sampler Q should be the stationary distribution of the MC-MC kernel defined by the current energy function F. One natural way to obtain the stationary distribution is to use power iteration. However, as this power iteration is defined in the functional space, we seek to use a variational objective for it. In high level, at each step, the sampler first generates several samples, then performs one step of the MC-MC transition. Next, the newly obtained samples will be used as supervision to further improve the sampler. On the other hand, we treat the local search as the discrete counterpart of HMC in continuous space. In HMC, the samples are refined step by step with a gradient. In the local search, the samples are refined by mutating the substructure of the current sample. Formally, we formulate the sampler using the following latent variable model. To obtain the sample, one can first sample from the initial distribution Q0 and then mutate using QA and stop when the stop policy triggers. With this, we can cast the learning of sampler as a learning to search problem. Now we are ready to present the sampler learning algorithm. Given a target X, we want to maximize the probability of any trajectory that ends exactly at X. In practice, we provide the following two proposal distributions that can give us such trajectories. The first one is a reverse sampler that is working backwards from the target sample X. The second one fixes the initial sampler and computes the shortest path from the initial sampler to the target sample. We first present our experiments on synthetic data. Note that for visualization purpose, we use gray code to represent the binary discrete data and convert them into 2D space for visualization. One can see that our approach can almost perfectly recover the ground truth distribution. The second set of experiments are for program synthesis. In this case, we study the conditional models, where the structured output is a domain-specific program, which is conditioned on the input-output specifications. Compared to the autoregressive baseline, the proposed approach can achieve much higher accuracy given the same amount of training samples. The last experiment is for software testing, where the model is responsible for generating a sequence of bytes to test the software. The evaluation criteria is the coverage, where a good generator should reach high coverage with the same number of generated samples. On a set of commonly used software like libpng, our approach can get comparable or even better coverage than the well-engineered systems like libfuzzer. Thanks for listening. Feel free to reach out to me if you have more questions.